whole period, by the way, like the dropping out of college and like cutting off my parents, all of these actions, getting married really fast, all of these actions, like before that, I had been on such a strict path, so regimented, so anxious, that when I decided to make all these crazy decisions, I was almost on a high, or like watching myself outside of myself, just like, wow, yeah, I can do whatever I want, you know, like almost not believing that I was doing what I was doing, and like just being amazed that I was actually making such wild choices.
That is a clip from this interview with Katy Kelly of the Multiversity Project. And in this interview, she's going to be telling a story about how she ran away from home, ran away from her life, and lost most of her identity. I give you a little content warning just in case you're listening with your family or something. We do talk a bit about psychedelic drugs, and we also talk a bit about abusive relationships. So just be aware of that. I ask you to do a little favor, big little favor for me. If you listen to this episode and you enjoy it, get some benefit, it shines some light in some dark part of your brain, then please go ahead and think about one friend you could send it to. Just take 10 seconds to think of someone special who might enjoy this, who might receive some insight from it. All right, let's get into it.
This is a beautiful thought.
So I'm here with Katy Kelly of the Multiversity Project, and she's going to tell us a very interesting, wide-ranging story about the concept of identity. And I don't know how else to introduce it, but about brainwashing and about a lot of things. How are you, Katy?
I'm doing good. I'm feeling nervous and excited, but mostly nervous to tell this story. I've never told this story publicly. So
Yes. Well, I'm feeling a bit the same.
Okay, cool. Great.
In good company. All right. So let's get the background. So you said the before the conflict of the story begins, you're in high school, like your senior years of high school. What's life like?
Yeah. Well, just for a little bit more background, just briefly, I think it's interesting to this story that my parents met in a fundamentalist religious cult. And then coming out of that was a big part of their like love story and getting together story. So they went through an experience of being extremely ideological fundamentalist Christians in a highly controlling cult in every single kind of way, to leaving and then eventually leaving the church and developing their own spirituality. And I kind of grew up with that in my childhood, like watching that process happen. So it'll just make sense later in the story. I was kind of primed to be thinking about ideologies and free thought and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so high school, my senior years of high school were pretty rough. I had falling outs with my closest friends who I had been friends with since I was 11 or so. And then my other closest friends went to different schools, so I was pretty isolated at school. I had a boyfriend, and he broke up with me my senior year. And yeah, so I was feeling pretty alone. And during that time also, my grandfather was suffering from Alzheimer's, and my dad was caring for him. So my dad was like pretty consumed by that. And also like under a lot of stress because he was back in some toxic family of origin dynamics. And then, yeah, also there were other things going on at home as well. Like that were very stressful. We had somebody live with us for a while, and that ended in a big conflict. I don't want to get into too many details there, but it was very uncomfortable, tense, and sometimes unsafe feeling in the home. At the same time as I didn't have really much support.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what high school was like. And as I was going off to college, my main area of interest had always been kind of conflict, ideology, belief systems, and why is the world fighting with itself?
Okay.
I was particularly interested in the Middle East because I saw that as a hotbed of conflict. And so my main thoughts going to college were, 1, I want to get really far away from home. 2, I want to study political science and Arabic. That was basically my plan. I wanted to get into foreign relations or something like that. So I went to a school right outside of Washington, D.C. that put me in contact with a lot of government officials and lobbying groups and stuff like that.
It's like hundreds of miles from your hometown.
Yeah, hundreds of miles. I'm from Minnesota, and this was right outside Washington, D.C., so other side of the country. Totally. Yeah, that was freshman year of college, where I was starting out.
Okay. And what was different from high school when you were going into college? What did you find the social dynamic like?
When I got into college, I was very socially anxious. A lot of people were really nice. I had a lot of opportunity to make friends, but I feel like I didn't have much confidence. I did get into a relationship pretty quickly, which was healthy. Like he was a good guy and a good influence. And then really my only other closest people in my life were my roommate and my roommate's boyfriend. We hung out most of the time. And aside from that, there were a few other people that I saw from time to time, but that was really my social circle. I was interested in my classes and the coursework that I was taking, but I was also, kind of getting a sense of what things in DC were like, at least from an outsider's freshman in college perspective. Like, it definitely seemed like a place where you needed to know people. And a lot of the guest lecturers, like former ambassadors, advisors to presidential offices and stuff like that, guest lectures that I had were extremely cynical people.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of things would they say?
Well, we had a visit from Michael Matrinko, who was, I think he was a former ambassador. I don't remember what his title was, but he used to work in Afghanistan and in Iran. He was one of the Iranian hostages in the Iranian hostage crisis.
Wow.
Yeah. He was a really amazing guy. Very strong. But the course was about U.S. foreign policy in Afghanistan. And his attitude, as well as the attitude of my professor, who was Afghan, and basically every other visitor we had, was that this is a hopeless situation. We're spending a ton of money. We're trying to help, but we don't know how to help. And maybe some people aren't really trying to help at all. When I was sent to Afghanistan for the first time, I'd barely even heard of the country, and I was supposed to be ambassador. And this is the level of incompetence and ignorance that we're dealing with.
Wow.
Stuff like that. And my government and politics 101 course was taught by a man who grew up in a former Soviet state. And so he was also very cynical about government and governance. And previous to that, I had kind of had this feeling like business is bad. They're trying to take money from people. The government is the people's voice, where we're trying to solve problems. And they have an incentive to do things right because it's about people voting. It's not about trying to get your money. It's about, following your voice.
The highest ideal of democracy.
Exactly. The highest ideal of democracy. And then when I got in there, that just wasn't... that image was kind of blowing up. And meanwhile, my roommate's boyfriend, who basically lived with us, he slept in our dorm every night, was an anarcho-capitalist, and we were getting into debates every single night. So my ideals were kind of being shattered.
Yeah. So you're in this sensitive state because it seems like you're realizing that the people who have experience in the world don't have faith in the system, and somebody who presents this alternative view. Well, for people who don't know what an anarcho-capitalist is, can you tell us what kind of ideas he was exposing you to?
Sure. So I would say that the base of the ideas and the base of the philosophy was voluntarism, which is linked in with anarcho-capitalism, but a little bit different.
Yep.
And the idea is that basically we all know from the time we're kids, good and bad, that forcing people to do things under violent threat or inflicting violence on peaceful people is wrong.
Yeah.
That's a moral statement that most people can accept on face value, at least. And I said, of course I accept that. You know, I'm very pro-peace. Ironically, I was in ROTC, but that was
in a military... what is that, ROTC?
ROTC is a military officer training program.
Right.
Yeah, I had made the decision to join that program because another thing I realized very quickly was everyone who I came across who had experience in higher levels of government either had military experience or just seemed... like the people who were getting internships around me seemed to be very well connected before they got into college.
I see.
So yeah, I was in ROTC, ironically. But yeah, so voluntarism, it's a philosophy of peace. Basically, the only rule is I do not initiate force, violence, threats of violence against anyone except for in self-defense. So that sounds pretty easy until you start applying that to the idea of government. And where I had previously seen governments as the voice of the people and, you know, the way that we resolve problems and give people without money a voice in society, his idea was more like government is a monopoly on violence in a geographic territory. Governments claim special rights. A law is really, it's a piece of paper, but it's also a threat against anyone who would break that law. And many laws are banning things that are not violent things. They can't be said to be defensive, like, for example, laws against drugs, or taxation being theft. That's a big one for anarcho-capitalists. Taxation is the government taking your money away from you involuntarily. So yeah, those types of ideas. And that actually aligned with the definition of government that I learned in my Government and Politics 101, which is government being a monopoly on force in a geographic area. I didn't have the experience in college that many people talk about of it being like very left-wing. At least my experience there, it was very realist. It was very realpolitik was the way that they talked about things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it was more from people who actually had those kind of experiences in government.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So having seen how it works, they were cynical.
Yeah. So yeah, that was freshman year of college. And it kind of culminated in an existential crisis for me, where once I had bought into the voluntarist or anarchist beliefs, or at least most of them, I no longer wanted to go into government. So I became extremely anxious and started dropping a bunch of classes, and then tried to figure out, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? I don't want to go back home. I was really nervous about college debt and getting a job out of college, so I concocted this plan to just transfer to the cheapest university possible and study math and become an actuary, because it seemed like a surefire bet to being able to pay off my student loans.
Yeah. Well, actuary, not a very sexy job title, but it's quite well paid. I guess it would be.
Yeah, it's pretty well paid. I mean, you can expect, like, I don't know, upwards of 60,000 out of college and then into 100, 200,000, like, up to mid six figures if you reach the top of the field. But it's a clear track. What I liked about it is it's a clear track. You pass these exams, that proves your qualifications. You know, I knew I could do it. I was good at math. So that I flew away to a small college in Wisconsin for my sophomore year, and that's what I was doing.
So it sounds like you had your world ruptured a bit and you didn't know what was happening and you were looking for something very certain.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, I was looking for some certainty.
Yes.
Sophomore year of college, I wouldn't say that I found certainty. I was, doing well in my classes and things like that, but I felt very alienated from the community around me. I didn't meet a lot of people who had a lot of passion for trying to change the world or do something big. Obviously, neither was I at the time, but I just felt very disconnected. I was increasingly, I guess I could say, radicalizing myself by spending hours a day on the anarcho-capitalist subreddit mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, the summer after my sophomore year is when I met someone who would later become my husband and then my ex-husband.
Okay. So we'll call him Roger. We won't use his real name.
Yeah, we can call him Roger.
Yeah. So what was it like when you met Roger?
It was really surreal. Because he was a voluntarist. And aside from my old roommate's boyfriend, I had never met anybody who shared similar beliefs to me in the real world. And not only did he share similar beliefs, he wasn't just like an internet voluntarist, I would say. He was connected to a community of many other voluntarists.
Right.
He was interested in entrepreneurship. He was interested in cryptocurrency. He was interested in the startup scene. He was interested in psychedelics. He had been a hitchhiker traveling around the country for many years. So it was just like a flood of all of these interesting things. And like, oh, I don't have to follow this track. Here's a person who's not following any kind of track whatsoever. And we're connecting and it's amazing. And it's, wow. It was very overwhelming and exciting and awesome and butterflies and falling in love and all those things.
Yeah. Well, I imagine as a young lady, it's like this guy comes along and is like, welcome to my world. These are people in my world, and these are things that happen in my world, and you would just you might be swept off your feet from that.
Yeah, exactly. I was very swept off my feet by that. It was like I was being yanked out of this this world where I felt isolated and anxious and alone, and I was just trying to have a sure track to like not have to go back home after college. And then all of a sudden it's like, come along with me on this adventure, with like the most interesting, exciting person possible, who was also like, I thought way too attractive for me.
Okay.
Yeah. So very quickly after meeting him and getting together, I decided to drop out and not go back the next year. Yeah.
What happened with your college day? Or is that, maybe we shouldn't talk about that.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about that.
Okay, never mind. Next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that bad.
Okay.
At this point, but yeah.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So
I didn't do the whole 4 years, so it's not that bad.
Okay. Okay. So you made the decision to drop out of college, and then what did you do?
Well, making the decision to drop out of college was that was a big deal.
Okay.
Because not only did I make the decision to drop out of college, I made the decision to drop out of college and move to Texas with this man that I had just met. Okay. So my parents and my friends and everyone around me was really freaked out. And I had been, keep in mind, my grades had suffered a little bit late in high school because I was very depressed. But aside from that, I had been a straight A student, never did anything wrong, never rebellious, anything like that. And so me going to my parents and my friends and saying like, hey, I met this guy and I'm dropping out of college. It's a big deal. But yeah, so I did that and told all my friends and family, and that was like, you know, that shook up the entire world. And then I moved to Texas, and I was basically just with him, got a job as a waitress. We were together basically 24/7 outside of work. For the first month, neither of us were working, living off of savings that I had.
Okay.
Yeah. And just becoming increasingly isolated there. And eventually we started a meetup group for Free Domain Radio.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is in Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is in Austin.
Okay. All right. So you started to, well, let's go back a bit. What was your parents' reaction like when you told them that all this stuff is happening?
Oh, that was really interesting. So I was too nervous to tell them. So I wrote them a letter, just explaining it all, and just gave it to them. Like, I was still at home, but I just like came downstairs and like gave them a long note and then went back upstairs.
Wow.
Yeah. And their reaction, I remember them, you know, like hearing whispers in the basement and my mom getting very emotional. The first reaction was like, who is this man? And what's going on? And they were pretty freaked out. After, you know, they tried to convince me not to be so rash or to maybe take some time off of college, but do it on my own.
Okay.
My dad got curious because, like I said before, they had been in a cult and they actually came out and became like, they helped people get out of cults. Mm-hmm. And my dad picked up on in me that I was sounding very ideological and euphoric and was picking up on like, she sounds like she's being converted into something. Mm-hmm. So he actually Googled my boyfriend.
Okay.
And found like posts of his on Free Domain Radio forums and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Free Domain Radio is a show by Stefan Molyneux. And then he did a lot of looking into Stefan Molyneux and, you know, found some people talking about how they thought that he was a cult leader and that he had taken their kids away and stuff like that. So he wasn't confrontational about it. He just showed me those things. Mm. He didn't feel that he could get anywhere by trying to tell me not to do what I was doing. Mm. He just wanted to plant seeds in my mind.
Yes.
So that was, after the initial freak out, that was kind of how they behaved until I left, moved about 2 months later.
Right.
Yeah.
So we did, I'll put the link in the notes. We did an interview with your dad, with John, right? John Kelly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, one very important thing, if you think somebody is getting involved in a cult, just be there for them. Because if you judge them too heavily, then maybe they'll cut off contact and then you won't be able to support them when they do leave.
Right. Hmm. Yeah, and also that even if they do cut off contact, if you were very judgmental of them before they did, they might be afraid to go back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. So what was attractive about Free Domain Radio and Stefan Molyneux to Roger or to you?
So it was more to Roger. Mm-hmm. I didn't know much about Stefan Molyneux or Free Domain Radio. I was really attracted to Roger's ideas, which a lot of them came from Free Domain Radio, but not all of them. And also I wasn't really aware of the connection. Mm-hmm. For him, Stefan Molyneux was a voluntarist, mm-hmm. a very outspoken voluntarist YouTuber podcaster. And he had hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of content talking about, you know, the evils of government force. But a unique thing about him at that time was he also talked a lot about child abuse. And he believed very strongly that our culture and society accepts a lot of mistreatment and controlling behavior of children. Like, Spanking. It's a code word for hitting, yelling at kids, telling them what to do, stuff like this. And Roger had a tumultuous relationship with his parents growing up. And I think that Stefan became like a source of security. It's like voluntarist philosophy. It's like a source of huge idealism and hope, and you feel like you're fighting for freedom. And then also it's like giving you meaning or something to latch onto if you don't have a good relationship with your parents. And then also there was a community that went along with that, mostly just online forums, Facebook and stuff like that. But if you were really, really into the show, it was like a community that became very supportive and could kind of become your whole world. Yeah. What
was Roger's relationship like with his parents when you met him?
He had no contact with his parents. He had, Stefan Molyneux's word was defoo. And for anybody who looks up Stefan Molyneux now he's like a far right winger, and he doesn't really talk about defooing anymore, to my knowledge. But he had this term called defoo, which stood for like family of origin, where you're divorcing from your family of origin. And Roger had done that.
So the idea is if your parents are abusive, maybe you cut them off and disown them.
Yeah, you cut them off and disown them. And I think an important part of this is like his definition of abuse included things like sending your kid to public school to be indoctrinated, or raising your child religious with religious shame, or spanking, or, things like that. He didn't straight up just like tell everyone to cut off their parents. He would tell everybody, like, if you're thinking about defooing, go to therapy. Everyone go to therapy. But at the same time, he had this call-in show where basically every time somebody called him in with like some kind of psychological problem, he would pin the origins of all of their problems on their parents and suggest that maybe they should defoo. So if you were really into this, the message was defoo.
Yeah. So you get to Texas, you get to Austin, and you're setting up this meetup with Roger, this voluntarist meetup. What's it like?
It was, like, at that time, I was so into this. I was like, great. So I left kind of normie, like normal stuff and government stuff. And now I'm going to be meeting I wouldn't have literally said it, but I was kind of thinking it like, I'm going to be meeting all the enlightened people. Like, these people are all going to be amazing. And this is like the community of people who believe in the truth and freedom and peace. And we're going to be talking about that and promoting that. So it was really cool. I mean, I did have kind of a feeling in the back of my head, like, these just seem like normal, flawed people too.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was really excited. And it was cool. The community was growing. We weren't trying to, take any kind of government action. We just wanted to create a friendly community for members of Freedom Main Radio to talk about philosophical issues and like debate and just have a community and maybe spread ideas to newcomers who came and were curious. That was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool. There was some trouble later where, like, Stefan Molyneux started veering more right-wing, saying some things about women, like, not directly, but just using phrases like estrogen-based parasites to talk about, like, single moms and stuff. Yeah, it was just like... he has an episode called Estrogen-Based Parasites. Not talking about all women, but just some women. But his language around women was really disturbing to me. And I was starting to like not like him or want to associate with a meetup. And eventually there was like a scandal where he lied on Joe Rogan and got caught. And so we disassociated from Stefan Molyneux, or defooed Stefan Molyneux, and just started a voluntarist meetup.
Okay. All right. So it was no longer about any kind of cult of personality. It was more about the ideas.
Right. It was just about the ideas. no longer the cult of personality.
And how were things progressing with your parents around that time? Were you still in contact with them?
So when I first moved to Austin, yes, but it was extremely tense. Because there was this thing called Real-Time Relationships, which is a book that Stefan Molyneux wrote. And it's basically, about saying whatever you're feeling in the moment and like airing grievances and stuff like that. So, and Roger, who I think we were not married yet. We got married pretty quick, like within a year. But he was encouraging me to like talk through my problems with my parents. So basically every conversation with my parents was like me bringing up some grievance about how I thought they had wronged me as a child. And it became this really negative spiral. And I felt very pressured, and like Roger wouldn't be happy with me, or like I wouldn't have really made the positive changes in my life to like become the strong person I needed to be unless I cut off my parents. He never told me to, and I think he would disagree about that pressure.
Okay.
But that's what I was feeling anyway. And probably within, I would say, 6 months of moving to Austin, I sent my parents a letter that I was disassociating with them, defooing basically, and that I wasn't going to talk to them anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. And
what were you feeling when you wrote that letter?
It was really surreal.
Yeah.
It feels kind of surreal talking about this. Like, I feel like I have an emotional distance from it.
Yes.
I remember thinking about doing it and thinking about doing it and thinking about doing it for months. I felt this pressure building, and it was like this anxious, like almost shaking inside me, thinking about it constantly. And part of me felt like it wasn't the right thing to do, but part of me felt like it was the right thing to do, and I just wasn't strong enough. And so when I finally did it, it was like jumping off of a high dive or something like that. Like relief that you've done the thing, but also fear about what you're doing and what the consequences are going to be. And also guilt. Some guilt mixed in there because I knew it was hurting them a lot. Yeah, like relief, fear, guilt, and excitement.
Wow.
This whole period, by the way, like the dropping out of college and like cutting off my parents, all of these actions, getting married really fast, all of these actions, like before that, I had been on such a strict path, so regimented, so anxious, that when I decided to make all these crazy decisions, I was almost on a high, or like watching myself outside of myself, just like, wow, yeah, I can do whatever I want, like almost not believing that I was doing what I was doing, and like just being amazed that I was actually making such wild choices with my life, and like letting it go to the wind.
So it was liberating in a way.
Yeah, it was very liberating. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, it was very liberating. It was very liberating. It was very intense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine living through that and just having the feeling like it's a dream or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. It felt like it was a dream, or it felt like, I remember having some thoughts, before all this happened, I felt so unexcited about the future that I couldn't even really envision it. And I had been suicidal at times. And during this, I just felt like, I felt definitely not suicidal. I felt like, I'm kind of ending my old life, trying something completely new. And even if it's awful and I'm making all the worst decisions possible, because that was in the back of my head, like I'm just surrendering myself to chaos, and at least it's going to be interesting. But I think it's going to be really, really great.
That does sound like there must be some kind of religious connotation there, surrender to chaos. It sounds like not satanic exactly, but there's something, I don't know what it would be.
I don't know. It was, I mean, I didn't think that I was doing the wrong thing. Those were just kind of like the doubts.
Yes.
I thought, I'm entering in, like, I'm following the truth and I'm being consistent with my principles.
Okay.
That was the big
thing. And
thing.
at the same time, surrendering to chaos.
And at the same time, surrendering to chaos. Because I was like, this is really, really out of the ordinary. These are not normal decisions for people to make. Like, everything that I'm doing on paper, if somebody had told me 3 years ago that this was their plan, sounds insane.
Now looking back, do you think you were following truth and being consistent with your principles?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think I was following what I thought was truth.
Yes.
And what I thought was consistency with my principles. But I had blinders on semi-unconsciously, where I was like blocking out all the nagging feelings or all the doubts I had about this new truth. Because like you said, I think I really wanted certainty. Yeah. And I felt like certainty in my beliefs about voluntarism.
Okay. So in a sense, maybe it was a simplistic answer and that gave you certainty. Would you say that's right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's right. It was almost like mathematical, the way that I thought about morality and right and wrong during that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like follow this non-aggression principle and that's all you need to know. Like add up the little formula and you know where your moral compass is. Exactly. Yes.
Exactly. And I guess added on to that was kind of the Molyneux influenced, like, people who aren't voluntarists or anarchists don't believe in the non-aggression principle. And at some level, that means that if you were to, if they support taxation, for example, then that means at some level that they support the idea of a police officer coming up with a gun to threaten you, to throw you in a cage if you don't give them your money. And if you don't comply, then they support you being killed for it. Like, that's the way the line of thinking goes. Everything is taken to its final conclusion. Like, everything is taken to the absolute extreme.
Yes.
And so that idea basically justifies cutting off and cutting out from your life anybody who's not an anarchist. Because if you imagine, that situation happening in real life, obviously you wouldn't want to associate with that person anymore.
Yeah. Because in a very, perhaps indirect way, they're threatening you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And once, when I cut off my parents, I also deleted my Facebook, changed my phone number, changed my email address. I moved within a few months. So it wasn't just cutting off my parents, it was also like cutting off all contact that I had with anyone that I knew before I met Roger and before I moved to Texas. And aside from work, the only people I interacted with were people from the voluntarist meetup group. And later, there was about a year period where I was just working from home, working online. And so I literally only interacted with other voluntarists. Aside from, like, store clerks or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened with your parents after you sent the letter?
They respected it. This is, like, one of the saddest parts to me, or one of the hardest parts since I started talking to them again, is they, when I like aired all these grievances and cut them off and said that I needed space to be healthy, they really took it to heart. They hadn't been abusive by any definition that I would use now. But like, especially towards the end of high school and when I was in college, and like that period of a few years was also a really chaotic time in their lives for a lot of reasons, where they were just like struggling with their own mental health issues and stuff like that. And so they, like, when I told them that I needed to cut them off to be healthy, like they took it seriously, they respected it, and to some extent, like, did blame themselves, I think. So yeah, they did. I mean, they told me later that they kind of, they found the meetup group online and would like look at comments that I posted just to make sure that I was like alive and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they tried reaching out a couple times. I didn't respond. It was probably over 2 years that I didn't talk to them, or around 2 years.
What do you think was going through their minds at that time?
My mom was terrified of my relationship with Roger, because of his influence and how quickly everything had gone. She was really terrified that I was in an abusive relationship. And I think she wanted to come save me.
Yeah.
My dad felt, like he had been through this process before of getting swept into an ideology.
Yeah.
And so he understood that. He felt, or at least he's told me, he felt that he trusted that I would be able to get out of a really dangerous situation were I in one. And so he felt pretty strongly about non-interventionalism. They, like, I know it was really hard for them. They went to a lot of therapy and, like, did a lot of self-improvement work on themselves during that time. Yeah. Like, it was really sad and really emotional, but also, like, really cool when I came back and saw that, like, not only had they been, like, great people all along, but they were, like, a lot healthier people when I came back.
You said your mother was afraid that you're in an abusive relationship. Now, would you look back and think that relationship was abusive?
I've kind of gone back and forth with that question.
Yeah.
It was never physically abusive.
Right.
And if it was emotionally abusive, I don't think it was intentional.
Yes.
Roger believed in these beliefs as much as I did. Or maybe even more than I did.
Yes.
And I do think that he thought that he was helping me and showing me the truth and all of these things. Like, I think we were kind of in it together.
Yes.
But also, like, especially later in the relationship, but even early on, like, he was very insecure and controlling in some ways. Like, he would find reasons for me to cut off new friends that I had made. Like, find reasons that everyone else was toxic, basically. I was getting too close to them. That's how I perceive it. And at first I went along with it, and later I didn't. And that kind of coincided with, like, the relationship became increasingly unstable and volatile, and like, it was a really emotionally bad place to be in, especially in the last year and especially in the last 8 months. We were together all in all for 3.5 years or so. Yeah. I don't know. like we became, of the many things that we became, like voluntarist, we were very strongly atheist, we became vegans, we became voluntarists, or we became polyamorous. Like basically like every societal norm, we were like, this is bullshit. It went hard the opposite way.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so I say that because like even after I had a gut instinct that things were really bad and toxic and I needed to leave. But we still really loved each other and I still loved him. And I thought, okay, maybe we can be polyamorous and just like be separate, but like still be one of the people that we love and one of the people that we see, but not like build a life together anymore.
Yes.
So, I mean, maybe this is moving on too quick, but like for off and on for about a year after I left, I still kept in contact with him. And it was actually someone else that I was kind of dating for a while who like wasn't trying to, but happened to see my laptop, like Facebook messages blowing up while I was in the bathroom. And he saw like all caps and stuff out of the corner of his eye. So he looked. And when I came out, he was like, I'm sorry, I know I should never look at your stuff, but I read these messages and this is an abusive relationship. And after that point, I started thinking about things a little bit differently. And things have been a lot better for my life since I've been out of it. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
What was your sense of identity like during that time? Did you feel certain about who you were? It's a hard question.
It is a hard question. I wasn't thinking about things in terms of identity, but I did feel pretty certain. Like I felt like I was certainly on this path of truth and changing the world and like finding all the problems in the world and like we're going to figure out how to fix them. My entire identity was wrapped up in all of the belief systems that I believed in. All of these new beliefs that I had taken on. Yeah. And that kind of came over me without me realizing it. I think that effect was a lot stronger because I had literally no contact with anyone from before this period of my life. So
sorry, literally no contact.
No contact with anyone from before I met Roger. So
yeah.
So like I had no reference point. I had some pictures stored away in a Google Drive, but that was it. That was all I had of my past. So I started to like not even remember things. Yeah, there was just no connection. My identity was like my bubble then.
Okay. Well, it's really weird to even think about because it's like, even if I asked, what did it feel like to be so separate? Well, you don't even think about it. So you don't feel anything about it. It doesn't enter your mind, right?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I guess I had some feelings like, I remember my beliefs at the time about it were something like, yeah, I mean, out of all the billions of people in the world, why would I think that the best people for me and the best path for me was the place that I happened to be born in? Like, I thought that people were crazy and doing themselves a disservice to hold on to things from their past and not forge their own lives.
Okay. It's very radically individualist.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, how did you finally get back contact with those parts of your life and those people?
It came slowly, and it came after I left Roger. So basically in the last few months of our relationship, things became pretty undeniably like really unhealthy.
Okay.
And that was like my realization of this was amplified by the fact that I was experimenting with psychedelics for the first time.
Okay.
And starting to form close relationships with people other than him. Because, I mean, ironically, like he had kind of convinced me into polyamory. That's the way I think about it. But once I started dating other people, or even just like having one-on-one friendships with other people, which had been something that I wasn't really doing before, I realized that other people treated me very differently. My relationships with them were very different. So like that was kind of drawing some contrast, because like before, when my whole relationship world was him, it was easy to be like a frog in boiling water. But once I got outside, I was like, oh yeah, like I am, you know, I was right when I thought that was kind of nuts. And like, that's not the way to do things. Like,
okay. Or like gaslighting or something, or just you have this warped baseline. You don't know what's normal.
Yeah, exactly. I had this warped baseline of how conversations should go and how, I don't know, thinking about truth and thinking about the past and like just emotional interactions and what was an acceptable, but like what was a normal outburst or whatever. I don't want to go into too much details there, but yeah, getting outside was helpful. And then we took a couple of group psychedelic trips, like with friends, and that was just like observing my own feelings and observing my own interactions with him and his interactions with other people. Really made things clear to me that I needed to get out.
What did you take?
LSD twice and mushrooms once over the course of about 4 months. Yeah.
And what was the experience like when you had those realizations?
The first trip was really bittersweet because we had been fighting pretty constantly up until that point, and then on the trip we had this like really beautiful, amazing experience together that was like reminiscent of how the relationship was when it started, where we were just exploring ideas and like being idealistic and really bonding, and it was beautiful and it was opening my world and all these kinds of things. And so it was kind of like a contrast to how things were now. I was kind of hopeful that maybe we could fix it.
Yeah.
The second trip was only a week later. That was weird timing. But we got invited on a road trip with some friends. And that road trip was very tense because whereas previously I felt like this was really unhealthy of me. This is really toxic of me. This is my shit. But like I felt like I could like manage some of his behaviors in public. Because we only went to like short events.
Okay.
Once we were with other people for, you know, like a multi-night overnight trip, he was getting in a lot of conflicts with other people. And it was like extremely uncomfortable for everyone. And so that, and it was a scary and uncomfortable realization, but it also kind of helped me see that it wasn't just me like causing the problem with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third trip wasn't so intense. It was a mostly positive experience, but like a lot of that trip I was just kind of sitting back quietly and like observing social dynamics between the people at it was like a small party.
Okay. You were on mushrooms.
On mushrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I realized that I felt tension and fear whenever Roger was interacting with anyone, because I was like afraid that there would be like, not that he would be violent or anything like that, but that there would be some like weird conflict or outburst or something like that. And I felt like I was hiding that in my own relationship with him. And like trying to control it, but I couldn't. Yeah. Coming to that realization was, I guess it was kind of scary. But also I kind of shut off my emotions and just like went pure practical, like, how am I going to do this mode? Because I had never lived on my own. Like I went straight from high school to college to like being with him. So I hadn't ever like gone out on my own outside of the structure of like parents or college or him. And I was really, really anxious about money. And like all that came back again. Yeah. So I just kind of went into this like dialed in, really practical mode of how practically I was going to like do things on my own.
Wait, was this during the mushroom experience, or that was like after that?
Oh, sorry. That was kind of
It was like your response to the situation.
Yeah, it was like my response to the situation. The mushroom experience was actually later, like after I had already kind of made this decision. We made it together. Like we both could recognize that things were bad between us, and we decided to split together. The acid trips were in April. The decision to split was in May, but we still had a lease, and the mushroom trip was in June. But I just mean kind of my overall attitude towards leaving was very like calculated. Yeah.
Okay. And then how long after that did you move to Mexico?
So we lived together up until I moved to Mexico. He drove me to the airport. We hugged and kissed goodbye and said, I love you. But we knew that I was leaving 3 months before I did. And we just tried to make the most of our remaining time together. But it was very hard and very tumultuous.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So it's still quite tense for those 3 months, but you kind of remained somewhat amicable.
Yeah, somewhat amicable, like bittersweet.
Okay.
It was like a love-hate thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to move to Mexico?
I'd read the book The 4-Hour Workweek.
That
was something that Roger introduced me to. Like one of the many, many, many things. So like I feel like I'm painting him really badly here, but like he was actually also really amazing in my life. So I'd read that, and in that book heard of the idea of digital nomads. Mm-hmm. And this was a goal that he and I had together. But I got an online job like a year prior to this, and I had been working online for a long time. He hadn't done that. So as soon as I was like about ready to leave, I figured, well, okay, I can't really afford to live on my own in Austin on my income solo without like really pushing myself. But it would be good for me to do the digital nomad dream, like go somewhere beautiful, live alone, be really, really alone, learn a new language, give myself the freedom to not have all this like financial stress so that I could figure myself out. So yeah, that was why I moved to Mexico.
So you moved to Puerto Vallarta. That must have been like 2016, 2015.
It was 2016. Yeah, I moved in September, and Trump got elected in November.
All right, so you actually did what so many people talked about.
Yeah, I've avoided the whole thing so far, the whole Trump presidency so far. Yeah. I think I contacted my parents within a month of moving to Mexico, and also contacted some old friends. Yeah, and my old college ex-boyfriend who I mentioned previously. And yeah, just to like catch up with people. And, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was it like when you talked to your parents after so long?
We cried a lot. Yeah, we cried a lot. It felt really, really, really good. I was so scared to contact them. Yeah, I was really scared to contact them because I didn't know what they would think. I didn't know if they would be angry with me. Or maybe it was just my own nervousness because I didn't think they were going to react poorly, actually.
Yeah. But even in that situation, even when you know somebody's going to be accepting, you're still like, what might they say?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I sent them a long email kind of similarly to how I cut them off. And it was an apology and, you know, explaining where I was and how I was and stuff, and that I wanted to talk. We video chatted very quickly. Everybody was crying. It was good. It was also surreal because it was like, you know, those relationships that are really close where even if you haven't talked in a long time, it kind of feels like no time has passed and you're just back in the routine with like we could just reconnect like that. There was no awkwardness. Yeah, so that was really good. It was also, I mean, like, they were, people visibly age over the course of a few years, especially at my parents' age, and they looked different, and that was really weird for me. They're doing really well. They're both really happy, but that was really surreal. And like my nephew was a baby when I had last seen him, and he was 3 years old.
Yeah.
So that was really, I don't know, kind of horrifying, realizing what I had done there.
It felt good, so I imagine you felt like relief, release, closure, or how would you describe it?
And all of those things, relief, release. It felt less like closure and more like a reopening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of memories started coming back. Like I said before, it was because I had no connection to my past, really. It was really easy for me to, like, forget a lot of things. But talking to them again, I remembered old inside jokes and, like, you know, I was explaining some of my experiences, and they were like, "Yep, well, that sounds like you," and in ways that were very apt. And I was like, "What? No, what are you talking about? I'm a completely different person." But I really wasn't. And like, yeah, I was seeing, you know, some of my traits in them, and, you know, recognizing the parts of me that came from them. Whereas, I guess the identity I'd constructed for myself without realizing it was completely separate. So realizing that I actually wasn't that different was that was interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of, well, it's good to get that kind of insight. Not that the whole situation is necessarily good, but because you can get that distance from your original identity, or the identity that maybe was assigned to you or a result of your environment, you can see that more clearly and understand yourself more.
Yeah, definitely. It does feel that way. It's hard to articulate, like, the things that I noticed or saw about myself, but I feel like I have a greater understanding of how my own psychology works, and, like, little subtle things.
Can you give an example?
Well, it was pretty humbling, but after I came out of the whole experience, and it wasn't just like over in one chop or something like that, but it was humbling because I had entered into voluntarism and this relationship with and defooing and like all these different ideologies and like starting this new life, because I felt that I had been brainwashed by society and my parents and everyone around me. And then I kind of, like, I felt smug towards my parents because they had been in a cult. You know? I was like, how could that even happen to a person?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like, I had just done exactly the same thing, but in this, like, twisted, quote unquote, supposedly free thinking way, which was such a me thing to do and such a, like, them thing to do too, you know? Like, I saw how I absolutely am their daughter. Like, it just made perfect sense.
Right.
So that was a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you try to run from your own nature. The more you run, it just proves your own nature.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
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 All right. So before the interviews, you said Tinder was an important part of learning more about yourself.
Yeah, that's true. So, and when I moved to Mexico, I didn't know anybody. I met a couple people, like, through the voluntarist community, and I still identified as a voluntarist at this point, who are really awesome, become some of my best friends. You were one of them.
Yeah.
Yes. But also, like, something that I did starting about 5 or 6 months after I moved to Mexico was Tinder, online dating, just to try to meet people, also to try to date people. And I had basically a lot of fear, since I hadn't interacted with anybody outside of the voluntarist community, that I was not an interesting or fun or intelligent or just valuable person in any kind of way, aside from my strong belief and, like, devotion to this belief system, which was righteous, you know? Like, because everyone I was connecting with was connecting kind of on that basis. And getting on Tinder and, like, having real, genuine, good conversations with people helped me realize that that wasn't the case. There was one fling in the particular. There were a few that were really impactful, but the one that I had previously mentioned, who had seen my messages and confronted me about that, probably opened up to him more than anybody else.
And that was somebody who lived in Austin.
No, that was somebody. This was in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was in Mexico. And yeah, he was a traveler, so he was only around for a month or so. And that was known from the beginning. But kind of because of that, I was very open with him and, like, told him about what I was going through. Yeah, we had so many interesting conversations about all kinds of philosophy and life, and we joked around and we did art together, and, like, we had fun times together and stuff like that, and he explicitly said, like, Katie, like, people are still going to like you outside of the anarchist community or whatever you're in. Like, you're not just that. Like, it's okay. Just, like, open up your world. It's okay.
Well, that's really sweet.
Yeah, it was really sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, tell me about taking acid in the mountains.
Oh. Okay. This story is also related to Tinder. So this was a Tinder date where we went to the beach, and oddly enough, there were some interesting coincidences there. The man had kind of an unusual name, and it was the same name as one of my early childhood friends' older brothers.
All right.
And there was some indication in his profile that he was from Minneapolis, which is where I was from. And he was about the right age, and he indicated interest in jazz. And I remember that my friend's older brother was in a jazz band when he was a teenager. So I thought it was him. And I wasn't really trying to date him. I was just like, hey, is this you? Do you want to meet up? It actually wasn't him. It was one of his close friends. And
With the same name.
with the same name.
Okay.
And the original brother was like cat sitting for him in his apartment at that very moment.
Okay.
So that was interesting. So we decided to meet up. And, we were just having like a normal time treading water in the ocean. And the water had been a little bit choppy that day, but it wasn't anything that was like scaring me. I had been swimming every day since I got to Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah.
But the weather changed while we were in there. We ended up getting pulled out by a rip current, and then the waves started getting big, and we were in an isolated cove, and there were rocks on either side of us, and we couldn't really swim parallel because we didn't want to get crashed into the rocks. So it was very intense. I mean, long story short, this could be a whole other thing.
Yes.
But long story short, we almost drowned, but we both survived. And when we made it to the shore together, we were, like, I think just pretty overwhelmed. And, we had just met a few minutes before, and then we, hugged, like, just a big hug of relief. Like, wow. So anyway, we had this weird childhood connection. We had just gone through this extremely intense near-death experience together. He was going to be heading back to where he lived in a few days. But before that, he was like, hey, me and my friends, the plan for this weekend is we're going up into the mountains to drop acid. Would you like to come? And I said yes.
Cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
I accept your call to adventure.
Exactly. I accept your call to adventure. So we went, and his friends were very thoughtful and intelligent, and he was also a very thoughtful and intelligent person. They had rented ATVs, and there was a complicated thing with having to switch out the size of the vehicle so I could come, and they had to pay like probably an extra $500 to $1,000 for me to come on this.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
And we went, and when we were tripping, like, a lot of the music that they were playing was very intense, and some of it was very life and death like and had ocean sounds in it. And there was a lot of, for me, it was very healing, just like processing the experience I had just had, because I was still having like flashbacks and having difficulty sleeping and stuff like that. But it really helped me integrate the whole experience. So this is kind of the context. But anyway, outside of that, this is when we were kind of coming down. We were around a fire, and we started talking about like political things.
All right.
Yeah. And turns out, like, this guy who I'd had the near-death experience with I'm not sure what his affiliation was exactly, but he had worked with, like, the IWW.
All right.
Which
the
is
Wobblies.
Yeah, the Wobblies. It was some kind of
International Workers. What is it?
International Workers. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it's a sort of communist or international union organization.
Yes. Yeah. He had worked with the Wobblies and taken this case all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
He had been very involved in like socialist, I don't know what affiliation exactly, but like very left activism, and was supportive of or possibly in Antifa. And like, his friends, I had all these beliefs that I was so sure of. I think we were talking about Ross Ulbricht, and his friends brought up some things about Ross Ulbricht that I didn't know, which made me question a lot of things that I had been told.
Yes. So Ross Ulbricht was a guy who was arrested for running the Silk Road website where people could purchase drugs and who sent away for several life sentences.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I generally support Ross even still, but it just made me question some of the narratives that I had been told.
Yeah.
Hearing other people's perspective, especially given that it was people that I had, I felt really connected to at the time, and I was tripping. So And after that trip, I had been questioning my voluntarist beliefs, but it threw things even more for a loop. And that was scary, because then I didn't even know like what my identity even was.
Yes.
At that point.
Okay. So what is it like to not know what your identity is? What does it feel like?
It was sad. It was kind of hopeless and hopeful. Like, there's a lot of possibilities, because you're no longer on the path you thought you were on, but you also have no idea what path to take.
Yep.
For me, there was a lot of humbling and shame involved.
Okay.
Because it was, I had felt certainty, and not only had I felt certainty, I had literally cut off all my friends and family because I had felt so much certainty. And then now I'm just like, oh, now I'm not so certain. Maybe I was just some like idiot radicalized teenager.
Right.
And now, like, I've dropped out of college. I have nothing outside of this community and this belief system. I have no idea who I am or what my life is for.
Okay. What is it like to have that hope that you have you could be anybody, that kind of potential? What does it feel like?
And that part feels amazing.
Yeah.
And that part, like, I do think I have to thank Roger, as we're calling him, for. Because, I mean, during my period with him, like, he had shown me that you really can break all the rules and, like, go out into uncharted territory and do what you want. There are many other ways. And I had kind of been through this experience before of leaving it all behind and setting out on a crazy path. So there was that hope and that confidence. Not just hope, but like kind of a knowledge that I was capable of starting over. And that felt very good, and kind of like, even though it was very, very hard and the feelings were largely negative, it was also liberating again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is interesting you say that about that confidence. It's like, yeah, you can have confidence, faith, even when you have no idea who you are, that you can figure things out.
Yeah, even when you have no idea who you are. And also, like, I mean, one really interesting thing about Roger is, I mentioned he had spent all this time hitchhiking. He had spent all this time hitchhiking with no money and no ID, and just going from place to place, like trading poems on the spot for food, or, doing like work trades and things like that. And he was really inspired by people like Jack Kerouac and Orwell, who had gone on these types of journeys. And so, like, I hadn't ever gone that low, but we were broke together a lot of the time. And I was broke after that a lot of the time, like completely, like no money in the bank account, or maybe overdrafted. And so there's not only this, like, you can be anything, but like you can be anything starting from literal zero.
Wow.
And like, he was very intentional about that too. Like, he wanted me to experience zero because he knew I had so much anxiety about it.
Wow. So do you still have that kind of faith? Like, whatever happens, even if you hit zero, you can make something, or you can find your way?
In a way. But my near-death experience kind of changed the context for me a bit. Because, I mean, I think there are situations, there are holes that you can't dig yourself out of. Like, I do believe in death, and I don't know if I believe in an afterlife. Probably not, honestly, for me personally. But I do still have faith, like, based on my feelings and my experience when I really, really thought that I was dying. That even in those moments when everything is the most dire, in a certain type of mindset, you can still appreciate life and be on a good and meaningful path, even if you only have a split second left. Does that make sense?
Wow. Okay. Let's move on, I guess, in case unless you have more to say about that.
No, that's okay. We can move on.
That's amazing. All right.
Thank you.
So you did tell me before the interview that the Multiversity Project also helped you with your identity, I guess.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
a couple of things really. So
the Multiversity Project is the podcast that I was a part of with Chris Guida, Katy, and Ariel Friedman, and you explore intellectual ideas and
we explore intellectual ideas. We explore different types of ideologies and belief systems. It's basically just our collective quest to try to figure out what's going on in the world and make sense of things.
Yeah.
And we're all coming from different backgrounds when it comes to belief systems that we've really, really identified with and been a part of in the past. And we try to take a multi-perspectival approach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's been really helpful for me. So when I moved to Mexico and even in the years after that, it took me a while of feeling uncomfortable or having some doubts about voluntarism to really pull myself from it. And I still haven't fully, it's still a big influence on my life. Mm-hmm. But my dream at that point was to become as some people call them, celebritarians, the people who speak for these ideas to try to bring voluntarism to the world through spreading these ideas. That's what I wanted to do. And once I started to doubt those ideas even a little bit, I no longer knew what I wanted to do. Soon later, I was building skills in graphic design, web development with Autonomite, and most of our clients are voluntarists. That's great. I don't mind doing that. I still think the movement is good. Mm-hmm. But I was just feeling kind of oh man, what am I doing? Maybe I'm just going to end up getting a job. I'm just going to build these design skills and get a job. Mm. But with the Multiversity Project, with you and Chris and Ariel and kind of what we've been exploring, it's just reinvigorated my passion for learning things and trying to figure things out in the world, and kind of the same passions that drove me to college in DC and that drove me to anarchism in the first place. But realizing that there's still a space for me to do that without getting fully sucked into one belief, and one perspective, and that it's still people still want to listen, and you can still do good in the world even if you're not certain, about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think I've come to a place of total peace with uncertainty, but this project has helped me a hell of a lot.
Okay. So you think having peace with uncertainty, you think it's an important thing for a well-rounded individual to have?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I wouldn't say I'm certain of that.
Okay.
I'm sorry. No, but yeah, I do think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, and one thing that I think to myself often, whenever I'm believing in something too hard, is, okay, there are people who are smarter than me and more well-informed than me that believe differently from me. Why is that? And what happens if I step into their mindset for a little bit? And not only just imagine what they're thinking, but imagine being raised as them and seeing it through their eyes, and having all the experiences that they have. And I think that's important, and I think that that's almost always going to be true, that no matter how well educated or smart you are and how sure you are of something, there's going to be someone who's equally or more educated and smart as you who's certain of the other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that came up when we read Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. He talks about putting yourself into the rabbit hole of the opposing political side or something like that, reading their articles and their periodicals and trying to imagine how they think. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It also kind of messes with identity in a different way, and that's where I'm at now. Is like, if you're not certain of what you think, that obviously fucks with your identity. And what I'm grappling with now is, I don't have certainty, but there are still some things that I feel would be good for the world and certain things that I feel instinctually are wrong. And like, how can you like be a positive force and do good in the world without knowing what you're doing is actually right? Like,
yes. Well, I think Robert Anton Wilson did that, and he had these mottos like, he said something like, belief is the death of inquiry or something like that. Belief is the death of curiosity.
I think it was curiosity.
Like yeah.
Or maybe he said curiosity is the death of belief.
It could work like that.
Either way.
Well. Yeah. Yes. Well, one thing I've been trying to practice lately is this, I guess it's a yogic practice of self-inquiry. Do you know much about it? No. Okay. This interesting. I forget the yogi who came up with it or who articulated it. Ram Dass describes this process, and he says, well, say you're seated in meditation, and you start observing parts of yourself, say with your feet, and you're like, oh, well, before that, you have this question in your mind. You ask, who am I? And you hold on to the I part of the question. And then you observe your feet and say, well, this is not me, or this is not my core identity. Move through different parts of your body, and then your digestive system and other regulatory systems in your body. And then maybe even your brain, or you're listening to things like listening to the cars on the street and trying to listen from within your mind, instead of, like, a lot of the time we listen to things as outside of our minds. And then you try to hear this gap between your perception of a sound and your consciousness. So, and you can find, it's very subtle, but I think you can find that kind of gap. And then eventually you get down, and it's like you've almost taken everything away, and there's just still this I thought. And then you say, well, that's not me either. That's not... And it's a very interesting practice. And I think it's a different way to look at identity. And I think it's a valuable practice.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yes.
To do and practice. That reminds me of, okay, so we've been talking about identity kind of colloquially. I hadn't even been thinking about it on that level, but that is pretty similar to how I think about identity in the I. Are you familiar with Douglas Hofstadter, who wrote Gödel, Escher, Bach?
Oh, I see the book here in Chris's shelf, but I've never read it.
I haven't read Gödel, Escher, Bach. I started it, but that's like it's a tome. It's an epic thing, and there's math in it, and it's like, that's a whole deal. But he wrote a book maybe 20 years later called I Am a Strange Loop.
Okay, yeah.
Because part of the reason was because he felt that the point of Gödel, Escher, Bach was misinterpreted. Mm-hmm. And what he explained in I Am a Strange Loop is that the book was a meditation on the self and consciousness in a way, and what it is. And he had a similar kind of idea that there are these like recursive looping processes going on in our minds and, in reality that build us. And if you strip away all the layers to try to get to some kind of core, that is you or the I, you're not going to find it. Like, you are an emergent property of all of the layers looping and interacting with one another. Seems to be kind of saying the same thing, but from very different tradition.
It seems like when I do this practice, it seems like there is something there. And I don't know how I would articulate it. I mean, sometimes it comes across as like this fuzzy feeling of being, a warm, fuzzy feeling, in fact. But I can definitely relate to that because, say, I'm trying to do this deep meditation practice and I'm having these verbal thoughts, and then this verbal thought might be pointing to other thoughts and saying, hey, that thought says it's an identity with you, or it identifies with you, or you identify with it, but that's not the entire truth. And then I'm like pointing out several of these thoughts that emerge, and then the thought turns on itself and says, actually, this verbal thought that's pointing out other things, also it's identifying with you, or you're identifying with it, but it is not you. And then sometimes when that happens, it's like that verbal thought disappears, at least for a little while.
Interesting. So the verbal part disappears, the verbal thought disappears.
Yes, it turns on itself and is silent for a little while.
I mean, so I guess we've spoken about this. You were on the Multiversity Project episode where we talked about like inner voices and if we think in verbal thoughts.
Yes.
I don't identify with my verbal thoughts like that. Like I agree that there's something underneath that.
Yes.
But there's also like what's going on under there is still pretty active, and
yes.
I don't think I am that either, because I think there's things that are informing that conscious.
Hang on, when you said that might require some clarification. You said I am that. I don't know if you know, but that's a famous phrase from the Vedas.
No.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Because that's like saying in the I don't know which Veda it's in, maybe the Rig Veda, but it says something like it says I am that, and what it means is the individual consciousness identifies with universal consciousness, something like that. Yeah, but you don't think you're the underlying processes. That's what
right. I don't think that I'm the underlying processes.
Yes.
That's what I meant.
Yes.
The idea of universal consciousness is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm that either. I don't think I'm that either.
Yeah, well, find out for yourself.
Yeah, I gotta find out for myself.
Getting back to your story, or like trying to tie this up and trying to get the elixir out of the cave to see what's the wisdom contained in the story. One question I'd ask, if you could change part of this story, or if at one point in the story you could offer your past self advice to take it in a different direction, would you do that? And if so, what would it be? When?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a tricky one.
Yeah, it's a challenging one. My instinct is no. Because, well, it's kind of the cliche answer, but I wouldn't be who I am without this story.
Yes.
At all. And specifically, like a lot of the things that I love and appreciate most for myself come directly out of this story and my experience with this story. Like, I don't know how well I can communicate what it's like to believe something with certainty and then have that fall apart like multiple times. And the type of mindset that I was in. And I feel like now I can recognize that mindset in others and kind of learn try to learn the frame that they're operating in a little bit. And you can never do that perfectly with an individual, but I feel like I can do it pretty well. And like I see these ideologies like all around me. Mm-hmm. And like having lived through this experience and knowing what that's like, and then knowing what it's like to come out and looking at it from the outside, like I almost feel like I'm out of the matrix a little bit. And there's no way. Yeah, there's no way I would have that otherwise. I don't think. And also, I mean, it was awful, but it was beautiful. Like my relationship with Roger, what it's done for my relationship with my parents. I mean, yes, we didn't talk for multiple years, but now we have a very deep shared experience. We understand each other on a completely different level. And like that whole period of my life was like the best of times and the worst of times. I liked it. It's better now in many ways, but I haven't experienced that level of intensity ever since. And I don't know. I think it was really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess part of the lesson is like, whatever crazy stuff you do in life, maybe you don't have to regret it, because it's important.
Yeah, it's important. Like I believe in, I guess you could say I'm a determinist or maybe a compatibilist. Like,
okay.
I don't really believe that things could have gone any other way. And like, I also believe like in the butterfly effect, that like the flapping of the wings of the butterfly causes the hurricane down the road, but like not in a causal way, one directional, but that everything is connected in that way. Like, I don't think you could change one tiny thing without having everything else be completely different. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or is there any other wisdom that you could glean from that story?
A couple of things. I mean, one of the really good things I learned during that period was like, I think it's good and important. And I think a lot of people like don't do the things that they want to do that seem crazy out of fear. And like that experience that like Roger gave me of, you know, like going to zero and coming back out.
Yeah.
You can do it, and like people do it.
Yeah.
So like and you might lose everything even if you're on the safe path. Like
Yes.
maybe statistically you're less likely to, but statistics don't apply to you. It's just your story. So I think it's worthwhile to take those kinds of plunges, and also you are capable of taking those kinds of plunges. I didn't think I was capable of taking those kinds of plunges, like to the point where I was kind of dissociated and just watching myself take the plunge, but I did it. So like you can do it. That's one thing. And then I guess on the flip side, I'd say like if you feel like you're 100% right about something and you're feeling almost religious about it, like you're probably on the wrong track.
Yeah.
Like
Well, what are the warning signs? Of course, there's like shutting people out of your life.
That's a warning sign.
Yeah,
that's a warning sign. I think the biggest warning sign is like if you start thinking that everyone else around you is an idiot or doesn't make any sense. Yeah, like if you start thinking that other people's perspectives don't make any sense, then that is a sign that your brain is blocked into some kind of a framework, because everybody makes sense somehow, you know, from their perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So a corollary would be like listen to people.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen
and
to
find
people.
out what the assumptions are behind their beliefs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Listen to people, find out what the assumptions are behind their beliefs. And like, even if you don't agree with them, it's valuable to have them in your life.
Yes.
What you said, cutting people off, that being a warning sign, I think that is often a huge warning sign. Like, you know, it can be good to cut people off if it really is a toxic relationship. But if you're in a situation where you're cutting off a huge number of people, or like most people, including new people, it's probably a sign that you're you're being purposefully isolated.
Yes.
And maybe you're either doing it to yourself or someone else is doing it to you.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's no good. I would say that other warning sign is just your gut. Like if you have a gut reaction that something is off. I wasn't really listening to that. Like I was interpreting that as meaning like, well, I'm just nervous or I'm just scared.
Yeah.
But I always had that gut feeling too.
Okay. So you can be introspective and get deeper with your emotions and try to look at them separately and ask them even what's going on here.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I guess another one. We're just spouting lessons. Like,
Sure.
if there's something that you're hanging on to because your identity is wrapped up in it, but you don't really believe in it anymore on some level, like there's light at the other end of the tunnel.
Yes.
And don't think that whatever belief system or identity or whatever you've downloaded is you.
Yes. I guess a lot of people get into this situation where somehow their identity and maybe the social group is tied to an institution like a church or some corporation or government institution, and they think they need to continue with it, and they might even start to go into denial because they realize things about that organization.
Yeah, it's like it becomes like a sunk cost thing. I think this is actually an important point. I feel like I've been saying this wrong, like about starting from zero and starting over. Like you're never really starting from zero because you have your experience and like your unique knowledge to build on.
Right.
So like, let's say that you're stuck in some kind of church and your whole social group and like all your skills and your job and everything is wrapped up in that church. You may have nothing in terms of material things, even if you leave the church, but like your knowledge and experience is applicable to other things.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah. So people can have faith in maybe that purest part of themselves to figure things out, and the fact that they've got those experiences to build on as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Great.
Yeah.
Is there anything else before you finish?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's been cool to tell this and to talk to you about it. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing your story and exposing that vulnerable part of yourself.
Yeah.
So, the Multiversity Project, what's the website?
It's multiversityproject.co.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, all the podcasting platforms.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Katy.
Thank you, Kurt.
A beautiful thought.
Thank you for listening. So if you follow the link in the description or go to beautifulpodcast.com, then you can find the show notes with the resources with links to things like the interview that we mentioned with Katy's father, John Kelly, talking about his experience as a member of a cult and later as a cult deprogrammer. So check that out go to beautifulpodcast.com and you can find the links there to multiversityproject.co. Thanks for listening. Another little favor, as I said at the top, if you enjoyed this episode, then please do me a huge little favor and think about one friend who you have who would benefit from listening to this interview, who might receive some insight from it, or maybe just be really entertained from it. And send them the link and give them a little reason that they would enjoy listening to this. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for listening, and thanks for having a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.